Nora counted the rations by touch, not light, because fire cost wood and wood cost time. Neither of them had. 3 strips of dried meat, half a wheel of hard cheese, enough for 2 days if they were careful, one if her brother kept eating the way grief made people eat. Pell was 9. He did not understand why their mother was not coming back from the lower valley. Nora was 16 and understood it too well. A dragon had landed on the road south of Denvrath 2 mornings ago, and the road south of Denvrath was where their mother had been walking. She did not say this to Pell. What she said was, "We move before the light comes up, we move quiet, we stop for nothing." Village of Denvrath sat at the northern edge of the Colvin Pass, pressed against a mountain that had no name because no one had ever bothered to name things this far north. 41 people, 2 dozen goats, 1 well that ran clean 9 months of the year and brown for the other 3. The dragons that held the Colvin Range did not care about Denvrath the way a man does not care about ants on the road, not with hostility, exactly, just with the complete absence of recognition that something is there. Until 6 days ago, this had been the village's only protection. Then one of the dragons, a range patrol, young by their reckoning, but still the length of 4 houses laid end to end, had decided the goat pen smelled interesting. It pulled the pen apart the way a child pulls apart a pine cone. 14 goats gone in the time it took Denvrath's elder, a man named Korath, to walk from his doorstep to the well. Korath had called a meeting. The meeting had produced the same result every meeting in Denvrath produced, an agreement that nothing could be done. Dragons were dragons, the range was theirs, the goats were a loss, they would tighten belts. Nora had not argued in the meeting. She had sat at the back and counted walls, exits, distances, the way she counted everything since their father left 4 years ago and did not come back. She had a plan. It was a bad plan by any reasonable measurement, but she had thought it through twice, which was once more than anyone in Denvrath thought anything through, and that gave it a quality that most bad plans lacked. She knew where the dragons slept. Everyone in Denvrath knew the patrol's den, a wide shelf of rock on the mountain's eastern face, about 2 hours of hard climbing above the snowline. They knew it the way people know the location of a wasp nest, precisely and with the sincere intention of never going near it. Nora intended to go near it. Not to fight it. She was 16, not stupid. She had 70 feet of old rope, a pot of fish oil, 3 rags, and a map she had drawn from memory of the shelf and the surrounding rock face. She left Pell with old Retta, the woman who made candles, whose house had a root cellar that could hold a boy and a handful of goats for 2 days if it had to. She left before dawn. She climbed in the dark because the dark was easier, no shadows to cast, no shape to spot against the rock face. She reached the shelf as the sky turned from black to the color of ash. The dragon was there, sleeping, which she had bet her life on. The patrol ran dusk to midnight, and young dragons, she had noticed over 3 weeks of watching from the ridge, slept long after their runs the way any young thing did after hard work. Its breathing moved its whole body, slow, deep, each exhale a wash of warm, damp air that smelled like burned copper. She did not let herself think. Thinking was for planning. This was the part after planning. She uncapped the fish oil and moved along the upper edge of the shelf, the narrow lip of rock above where the dragon slept, where a crack in the mountain face ran 20 feet left to right. She poured the oil into the crack the length of the shelf. She placed the rags. She tied the rope to the iron spike she'd driven into the rock 3 nights ago on a scouting run, letting the other end drop down the back of the mountain. Then she struck the flint. The oil caught, not an explosion, a fast, stuttering line of flame that ran the crack and dropped burning rags onto the shelf floor around the sleeping dragon. The dragon woke. What a woken dragon sounds like from 6 feet above it is not something Nora had a word for before that moment. She had one after. It sounded like the inside of a bell if the bell were the size of a barn and had never been rung before. It was a sound that hit the chest before it hit the ears. She was already on the rope. She went down the back face of the mountain so fast that she lost skin from both palms before she hit the first ledge. Behind her, above her, she could hear the dragon thrashing on the shelf, disoriented by smoke and fire in a space it had believed completely safe. Not hurt. She hadn't intended to hurt it. Hurt was permanent, and permanent meant consequences she couldn't outrun. She had intended to interrupt it. Specifically, she had intended to interrupt its patrol schedule for at least one day, long enough for every person in Denvrath to move their remaining goats, their food stores, and themselves to the other side of the Colvin Pass before it re-established its territory. She hit the lower snowline at a run. She had 2 hours before the smoke cleared, and the dragon remembered it was the most powerful thing for 40 miles in any direction. She used every minute of them. The other side of the Colvin Pass was a valley called Thurwick, and Thurwick already had too many people and not enough patience for 41 more. Nora could tell this from the way the gate man looked at Korath, who was speaking in the careful, measured tone he used when he was trying not to beg. The gate man's expression did not change. It had the quality of a decision already made. The pass villages don't have resettlement rights in Thurwick, he said. That's charter law. The charter, Korath said, still measured, was written before the current patrol range expanded. Take it up with the warden. The warden is 3 days south. The gate man shrugged. The shrug said, that is not my problem in a language older than words. Nora had been standing at the edge of this conversation with Pell's hand in hers and a thought forming that she did not like but could not argue with. She'd moved 41 people over a mountain pass before dawn on the strength of a plan that had worked so far. Now they were standing outside a wall in the early morning cold, and the plan's next step had not existed when she made it. She looked at the people of Denvrath behind her. Old Retta, who had carried her candle molds over the pass because they were the only tools she owned that were worth carrying. The Solver brothers, who were 15 and 12 and had not spoken since they saw the road where their grandmother had been sitting. A woman named Purdy's who was 8 months along and had walked the pass without a single complaint, which was the bravest thing Nora had seen in her 16 years. She let go of Pell's hand. Stay here, she said quietly, right here. She walked past Korath and past the gate man and put her hand flat on the gate. The gate man looked at her hand, then at her. She was a thin girl with rope burns on both palms and mud from the snowline on her boots, and the particular expression of someone who has already done the frightening thing and found that the world did not end. We have a woman in labor within 2 days, Nora said. We have 2 children whose family was killed on the South Road. We have an elder who cannot survive another cold night outside walls. I don't know your charter. I don't care about your charter right now. I need 12 hours inside your walls, not resettlement, not charity. 12 hours, for the woman and the children and the elder. The gate man said, and the rest. We'll sleep outside the wall and argue the charter in the morning. He studied her. She did not look away because looking away cost things she could not afford. He opened the gate 14 inches. The woman, the children under 12, the elder, the rest waits. Thank you, she said. She meant it plainly, without decoration. Purdy's went through first, then Pell, then 6 more children Nora pointed at quickly, including the Solvar boy, because he had not eaten since yesterday and his color was wrong. Then Korath, who was 63 and had knees that had been bad for a decade. The rest of Denvrath sat down against the outer wall in the cold morning air. Nora sat with them. Korath sent a girl back out through the gate 2 hours later with a pot of something warm and a message that said there was a Thurwick alderman willing to discuss provisional entry if someone could speak to the patrol problem. Korath's note said, send Nora. She went in. The alderman was a wide man with careful eyes named Brussuck, who had been managing Thurwick's relationship with the Colvin Range for 11 years, and had the look of someone who had stopped being surprised by bad news but had not yet stopped being tired of it. He told her the problem plainly. Thurwick's own patrol situation was unstable. 2 of the 4 dragons on the Thurwick Sud Range had been ranging further south than their territory, which was pushing a 3rd, an older, larger one called by the locals simply the Iron, into Thurwick's farmland in the Northwest Quarter. 3 harvests in 5 years had been partially destroyed. Thowuk could not absorb Dunvrith because Thowuk was already close to breaking. Nura listened to all of it. She asked 2 questions: where exactly the iron's new pattern ran, and what the geography of the Northwest Quarter looked like. Brusuk told her. He asked why. She said she wanted to think overnight. He gave her a room, a real room, with a real floor and a window, and she sat in it alone and drew a map from what he'd told her, which was a habit she'd had since she was 12, and which her mother had called her one useful quality. She stared at the map until she understood it. The iron was not ranging into the farmland out of aggression. The pattern Brusuk described was not territorial, it was avoidance. Something on the eastern ridge was pushing it west, something recent, something the 2 younger dragons' expanded range had introduced. She knocked on Brusuk's door at midnight. He opened it in his coat over his sleeping clothes, with the expression of a man who had been expecting this. "There's a nest on the eastern ridge," she said, "something that moved in when the young pair expanded. The iron isn't attacking your farms. It's being pushed off its own ground, and your farms are the edge of where it can go." Brusuk stared at her. "If you can confirm the nest," she said, "you can go to the warden with a territorial dispute between dragons rather than a human complaint. That's a different kind of case. That gets a different kind of response." He said, "How do you know any of this?" She said, "I watched the Dunvrith patrol for 3 weeks before I made a plan. I watch things." He was quiet for a moment. Then he opened the gate for the rest of Dunvrith in the morning, on provisional terms, while he sent a rider to confirm the eastern ridge. The rider came back in 4 days. She had been right. The warden's name was Djavana, and he arrived in Thowuk 17 days after Brusuk sent the rider, which was faster than anyone expected, which meant the eastern ridge situation was worse than anyone had said. He was not what Nura expected a warden to look like. She had imagined someone in armor, official and loud. Djavana was 50, thin through the shoulders, with ink stains on his right hand and the habit of listening without moving his face. He reminded her of a man waiting to catch someone in a lie, not a man who expected the worst, just one who had learned not to assume the best. He interviewed Brusuk for an hour. Then he interviewed the Eastern Ridge rider. Then, at the end of the 2nd day, he asked to speak with whoever had identified the nest. Nura went in. Djavana looked at her for a moment without speaking. She had the feeling of being counted, not dismissed, just tulled. "Brusuk's note said you came from Dunvrith," he said. "Yes, over the pass. Yes, in 1 night. We left before dawn. It took most of the night and part of the morning." He nodded slowly, like this confirmed something. "And you identified the nest from a territorial movement pattern you observed in 1 conversation." "I had context," she said. "I'd been watching the Dunvrith patrol for 3 weeks." "Why?" She looked at him. "Because it was eating our goats." He was quiet for a moment. The ink-stained hand moved to a page and back. "The Eastern Ridge situation is significant," he said. "There are 3 nesting pairs. They came up from the southern range in late summer. Something drove them north, which is a separate problem. The iron's displacement is real, confirmed." "I know," she said. He looked at her again. "You know. You came 17 days after the rider. If it were a small problem, you'd have sent a letter. You came because it's not small and you need information before you go to the range authority." Djavana set down his pen. He looked at her the way Brusuk had looked at her at midnight, like a man recalculating something he thought was already settled. "What do you know about range authority?" he said. It was not quite a question. "Only what passes through a village at the edge of a patrol range," she said, "which is more than people think, because no one closes doors when they talk near us." This was the truth. The other truth, the one she did not say, was that she had spent 3 years reading anything that passed through Dunvrith's one trading post: ledgers, policy papers, patrol logs that merchants sometimes used as packing material. She could not have said why she read them so carefully. She had simply always believed, in the way that becomes belief before you can name it, that information was the only thing available to her that did not cost money she did not have. Dyavanna folded his hands on the table. The range authority, he said carefully, does not receive complaints from human settlements. That is charter structure. They receive complaints from other dragon territories and from wardens on formal petition. I know, she said. A formal petition requires documented evidence of territory disruption across at least 2 ranges. The Iron's displacement is 1, she said. If the southern drive pushed 3 nesting pairs north, something else in the south shifted first. That's a second range. He was very still. If you have a documented southern incident, she said, you have standing for a formal petition. You don't need Thoak to keep suffering through a complaint process that was never designed to help them. You go over it. The silence in the room lasted long enough that she began to wonder if she had miscalculated, if she had pushed somewhere that did not push. Then Dyavanna said, there was a southern incident, 8 weeks ago. A range fire in the Vault lowlands disrupted a primary feeding ground and pushed population north. It was recorded, but not escalated. Then you have it, she said. I have documentation. I have not yet connected to the Thoak situation in any formal filing. Is it accurate? Yes. Then it should be connected, she said simply. Another silence. This one had a different quality, not the silence of a man deciding whether to trust her, but the silence of a man deciding how much of something he already believed to say out loud. You are suggesting, he said slowly, that I file a cross-range disruption petition to the range authority on behalf of a human settlement using documentation I collected independently. I'm suggesting you file an accurate petition that happens to also help Thoak, she said. The accuracy makes it valid. What it helps is separate. He picked up his pen. He did not say yes. He also did not say no. He asked her 6 more questions over the next hour, specific questions, the kind that needed real answers and not approximations. She answered all 6. Once she said she did not know and told him what she would need to find out to know, which was more useful in his expression than the answers she had gotten right. When she left, Brussak was waiting in the hall. Well, he said. He's writing something, she said. Brussak exhaled. That's more than the last 3 years produced. She went back to the room with the real floor and the window and sat with the map she'd drawn and added to it what she now knew. The map was getting complicated. Complicated, she had always thought, was not the same as impossible. Complicated just meant more things to count. She counted them until she fell asleep. The petition reached the range authority in 22 days, which Dyavanna said was fast, and which Nura suspected meant he had written it before he left Thoak and sent it by fast rider from the next town south. What came back was not what she expected. She expected, at best, an acknowledgement, a written confirmation that the petition was received and would be reviewed, the kind of language that meant nothing was going to happen for 6 months. What came back was a summons. The range authority wanted to speak with the individual who had provided analysis in the warden's petition. There was a name attached to the summons, not Dyavanna's, not Brussak's. Hers. Kurith found her at the well when Brussak's runner brought the letter. He read it over her shoulder in the way old men do when they cannot help themselves. And when he finished, he made a sound she had never heard from him before, not quite alarm, not quite pride, somewhere between the two where neither word reached. You don't have to go, he said. I know, she said. It's 3 days south. The range authority sits in Calvin. It's not a place for, he stopped, started again. They don't speak to people from the past villages. They're speaking to me, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, your mother used to say you'd either save us or spend us. She folded the letter. What did she think was more likely? He almost smiled. It didn't quite make it. She could never decide. She left Pell with Retta again. which Pell accepted with the specific patience of a child who has learned that arguing with his sister costs more than it wins. She took the map, her boots, 3 days of food, and the rope, not because she thought she'd need it, but because it had been useful once, and she had started to think of it as part of her. Calvin was not a city the way the trading towns along the South Road were cities. It was more like an authority given physical shape, heavy buildings, wide roads, the kind of architecture that has no interest in being beautiful because it does not need to be. It was built to be present, to be undeniable. Nora understood this about it immediately and found it more useful than intimidating. She arrived on the evening of the 3rd day and was given a place to sleep in an inn that Juvain had arranged, which meant he had expected her to come. In the morning, she was taken to a building that had no sign outside, because no sign was necessary. There were 3 of them at the table. She had not been told their names in advance. She learned them over the course of an hour. Issen, who was the oldest and asked the first questions. Marit, who took notes in a hand so small and fast it looked like a different language. And Orville, who said the least and watched the most, and whose silence had the quality of a door that had not been opened yet. They asked her about the nest identification. She explained it. They asked her about the patrol behavior analysis from Denvrath. She explained it. Issen asked her how a girl from a past village had developed a methodology for reading dragon territorial behavior. She said, I watched and I wrote things down. I don't know if it's a methodology. It's just what I do. Marit's pen did not stop. Orville spoke for the first time. His voice was even, no particular temperature. The cross-range connection you identified is accurate. The southern incident and the northern displacement are linked. We had the documentation for both. We had not connected them. I know, she said. Juvain told me. How did you know he had it? He arrived too fast for the nest information alone to have brought him. He already had something. I just gave him the link. Orville looked at her for a moment, and the link came from thinking about what would push a nesting group north in late summer. Late summer means a disruption during breeding season. Breeding season disruptions tend to come from food supply changes or ground disruption. Ground disruption at that scale in the south, something that would push 3 pairs, has to be significant. Significant things in the south get documented. Juvain had been south. The room was very quiet. Then Issen said something she had not expected. He said, we have a problem. She waited. The range authority receives information from wardens, from range patrols, and from interterritory formal channels. We do not receive information from individuals. There is no mechanism for it. Whatever value your input has, and the petition's accuracy suggests it has real value, we have no framework to continue drawing on it. You mean the charter doesn't allow you to talk to people like me, she said. Correct. She thought about this, not the injustice of it. She had stopped being surprised by that kind of structure when she was 12. She thought about the shape of it, where the gap was. Wardens can employ analysts, she said. I've seen it in the patrol logs, civilian technical advisors. The charter allows it at warden level. Marit's pen stopped for the first time. Juvain hasn't filled that post in his jurisdiction, she said. It's a northern posting. People don't take northern postings. Orville said, are you suggesting? I'm suggesting you tell Juvain he has an open advisor post, she said. What he does with that information is his decision. The door that had been Orville's silence finally opened. He looked at her, not the look of a man who had just been surprised, but the look of a man who had been waiting to see if the thing he suspected was real. You're 17, he said. It was not a question. 16, she said, almost. He nodded once, slowly, like something settling into place. We'll write to Juvain, he said. Juvain wrote back in 12 days. The letter was 4 sentences. The last sentence said, the post is yours if you want it. She took Pell north on the road back through the pass because she was not leaving him with Retta indefinitely, and because Pell had, over the past weeks, started helping Retta catalogue her candle stock with a precision that made Retta call him a small strange gift, which was the highest praise Retta gave anyone. He could stay useful. She would find him a place. She started work in Juvin's office in the town of Colset, 2 days east of Thurwick, 1 day from the pass roads, on the 7th day after she said yes. Her desk was small and near a window that looked out over a stable yard, which she preferred to a window that looked out over nothing. The work was not what she had imagined. She had imagined something dramatic, decisions, confrontations, the feeling of things changing. The work was mostly reading, patrol logs from the last 11 years that no one had organized into anything useful, survey reports that described range boundaries in language so careful it had stopped meaning anything, incident reports that recorded events without connecting them to causes. She organized them, she drew maps, she found patterns. The patterns were not small. 12 years ago, the Colvin Range had 15 distinct patrol territories. Now it had 9. 6 territories had collapsed, merged into neighbors, abandoned or reorganized, and the records showed this happening but did not ask why. She asked why. The answer, which took her 3 weeks to pull from 11 years of disconnected reports, was water. The high-elevation water sources in the Colvin Range had been shifting for at least a decade. Several had dried. Several had moved, not geographically, but in terms of season, coming later each year and running shorter. This affected prey migration. Prey migration affected feeding viability. Feeding viability determined whether a territory could sustain a resident dragon. The territory collapses were not aggression or politics, they were survival. And the pressure that created was rolling outward, toward the pass villages, toward Thurwick, toward everywhere the displaced had to go. She brought this to Juvin on a Tuesday morning with a map that was now 14 sheets of paper pinned together. He stood at the map for a long time. "This is documented," he said finally. "All of it is from existing records," she said. "I didn't add anything, I just connected what was already there. The range authority needs to see this." "Yes," she said. "They will not be pleased," he said. "This suggests the territorial disruption is systemic, not incident level. If it's systemic, it requires a systemic response. That costs significantly more than responding to individual incidents." "I know," she said. "That's why it hasn't been put together before. It's easier to respond to one goat pen at a time." He looked at her with the expression she had come to recognize from him, the one that was not quite tired and not quite surprised, somewhere between them. "How long would it take you to write this up, in formal petition language?" "I've already written it," she said. "It's the map and 12 pages. I can add citation indexing if you need it." He looked at the map again, at the spread of it, at what it meant. "This will force a response from the dragons," he said. "Not just the range authority, the territories themselves. The older ones, the anchor territories, they don't accept oversight. They've never had to." "I know," she said. "You're aware that this could make things significantly worse before it makes them better." "Things are already getting worse," she said. "We're just not tracking it fast enough to see it. If we present this now, we control what the response looks like. If we wait until it's undeniable, we don't." Juvin sat down. This was unusual. He usually stood when he was thinking. He sat for almost 2 minutes without speaking. Then he said, "There is a formal review mechanism for systemic territorial issues. It has not been invoked in 40 years. It requires a range authority recommendation and 3 warden co-signatories." "I know," she said. "I found the charter provision in the 3rd week. I've been waiting to see if you knew about it." He looked up at her. Something moved across his face, not offense exactly, something more complicated. "Did I pass?" he said. "You sat down," she said. "That means you're taking it seriously instead of finding a reason not to." "Yes." He made a sound that was almost a laugh. It did not quite make it, the same way Korath's almost smile had not quite made it outside the well, and she recognized the shape of it, people who had learned to be careful with their hope because it had cost them before. "I know 2 wardens who will sign," he said. "The 3rd will be harder." "Bresic will sign," she said. He's been looking for something to sign for 3 years. Duvin looked at her. I'll write to him, she said, if that's acceptable. He nodded, slowly, the same settling motion Orville had made in Calvin. She began the citation index that afternoon. It took 4 days. She sent it to Bressick with a letter that was 3 paragraphs long and did not ask him for anything. It simply told him what the map showed and what it meant for Thurwick's northwest quarter and let him reach the conclusion himself. Bressick's response came in 9 days. It said, "Where do I sign?" She brought the completed filing to Duvin on a morning when the light was good and the stable yard outside her window was quiet. 3 warden signatures, range authority documentation, 12 pages of cited analysis. The 14-sheet map, carefully redrawn on proper survey paper. Duvin held it for a moment. They will not like this, he said again. No, she agreed. The anchor territories have not been formally reviewed in recorded history. I know. You understand what that means for the girl who made the filing. She looked at him directly. I understand what it means for the people in the past villages if no one does. He filed it the next morning. The response from the anchor territories came not in writing, but in presence. 3 of them landed in the field outside Colset on a morning 6 weeks after the filing, not to negotiate. Dragons did not negotiate with wardens over filings. They came to demonstrate that the filing had been noticed, which was its own kind of language. They sat on the field for 2 days and then they left, and the message was clear to anyone who could read it. We are aware of you. Duvin looked older after those 2 days. Not frightened, he was not a man who frightened easily, but older in the way that real stakes age people differently than ordinary difficulty. The Range Authority sent its own response 8 days later, a formal acknowledgement that the systemic review mechanism had been triggered. The review would require representation from the anchor territories and human settlements alike. A convening location would be determined. A date would follow. Nora read the acknowledgement twice. Then she read the section on representation again. Human settlement representation in a formal systemic review was technically permitted by the mechanism's original charter language. It had simply never happened because no review had been triggered in 40 years, and no one had needed to read that far into the document. She went to Duvin. The settlement representation provision, she said. It says settlements in affected ranges may present documented analysis to the review panel. I see that, he said. I have the analysis. He looked at her. You want to present in front of the anchor territories. I want the analysis presented, she said. It doesn't matter who does it as long as it's accurate and complete. It matters, he said quietly. Whoever presents it will be the human standing in front of beings that have never been reviewed, never been questioned, and have not changed the way they look at anything in 3 centuries. That is not a comfortable position. No, she said, but it's an accurate one. He was quiet for a long time. Outside the window, the stable yard was loud for once. A delivery, horses, the ordinary noise of ordinary things moving through an ordinary day. You are 16, he said. Almost 17, she said. He made the almost laugh sound again. This time it made it slightly further. The convening was held in Calvin 6 weeks later, in a building large enough for the anchor representatives to attend in a form the Range Authority called observational presence. A careful phrase for the fact that 3 ancient dragons sat on the open ground outside the building's eastern wall, while their recognized speakers, lesser members of their ranges, sat inside at the table. Nora sat on the human settlement side with Duvin on her left and Bressick on her right. There were 4 other wardens and 2 aldermen from affected regions whom she had never met but who had, she was told, read her analysis and asked to attend. The Range Authority opened the session. The anchor territory speakers presented their position first. Territorial disruption was cyclical, had always self-corrected, and did not require human-level intervention or documentation. The water source issue was acknowledged as a factor. It was described as temporary. When it was the settlement's turn, Juvain stood and introduced the filing. Then he sat down and Nora stood up. The room changed temperature. Not metaphorically. The Anchor territory speakers, the dragons in human-scaled form that the range authority used as a conceit for these meetings, looked at her with the specific quality of attention that apex creatures give to something they have not bothered to categorize before. It was not hostility. It was almost more unsettling than hostility. It was assessment, running on a timescale she could feel was much longer than her own. She presented for 40 minutes, maps first, then the water source documentation, then the 12-year territorial collapse sequence, then the cascade pressure toward the pass villages and the lowland settlements. She had added one thing since the filing, a projection, careful and conservatively drawn, of what the pattern would produce in the next 8 years if nothing changed. No one interrupted her. She sat down. The eldest Anchor speaker, a figure who sat very still and had not moved since she began, said, "The projection." "Yes," she said. "You derived this from 11 years of administrative records." "Yes." "How long did that take you?" 3 weeks for the initial read, 4 more to map it and cross-reference the water surveys. A silence that had weight. "Our own range memory," the speaker said slowly, "covers this same period. The pattern you describe is consistent with what we know." The room did not move. "We did not believe," the speaker continued, in a voice that carried the quality of something being said with care, because it was hard to say, that a human would have the capacity to read our territorial history from administrative records. We would not have thought it possible. Nora said, "With respect, you didn't read the administrative records. We did because we had to. When your territory shifts, we are the first to feel it." The silence that followed was different from the others. It was not the silence of people deciding what to say next. It was the silence of people sitting inside a fact that had just become undeniable. The eldest speaker looked at her for a long time. She did not look away. "The water sources," the speaker said finally. "There may be intervention options we have not considered. We have managed territory for centuries by the assumption that what has been stable will remain stable. That assumption may require revision." Orville, from the range authority side, said carefully, "That revision could form the basis of a joint working agreement." No one disagreed. The convening lasted 3 more days. She was in the room for most of them. By the 3rd day, the Anchor speakers were directing questions at her directly rather than through Juvain, which Bresic later told her was unprecedented. She believed him. It felt unprecedented. It also felt like the only logical outcome of being the person in the room who had read everything. The working agreement was signed on the morning of the 4th day. It was not everything. It was a beginning of something, a formal acknowledgement that the territories and the human settlements existed in the same system, were affected by the same pressures, and would, from this point forward, account for each other in the records. On the road back north, 3 days later, Pell asked her what had happened. She thought about how to explain it. "We showed them something they already knew," she said. "We just wrote it down where they could see it." Pell considered this seriously, the way he considered most things. "Was that hard?" he said. She looked at the road ahead, at the pass rising in the distance, at the mountain that still had no name. "The climbing was harder," she said. He nodded, satisfied. He trusted her assessment of things. She had never given him a reason not to. They walked on into the afternoon, toward the pass and through it, heading home.